on the tax system in Ireland, the revenue model, FDI. And I think ultimately it's always been a topic, but not more relevant than it is today with the announcement of tariffs. It's really focused people's attention, and it does make it more relevant for what we're going to discuss today. So we're very lucky to have an all-star panel, and for that, obviously, you need an all-star host. So we're delighted to have friend of MacGill and journalist and broadcaster Sarah Carey. So please give her a huge round of applause. Thank you so much.
Hi. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It really is lovely to be back here at MacGill, and as usual, thank you for the full house and your attention. I'm lucky that the sun is not shining, so at least I don't have to compete with good weather. We've a super panel here for you today. Our first guest that I want to introduce is Sean Finlay. He's president of the Irish Academy of Engineering, and as you know, everyone is talking about infrastructure these days, that this is what we really need to focus on, and Sean is the infrastructure king, so you're very welcome here today, Sean. You all know Danny McCoy, the CEO of IBEC, one of our most influential thinkers and thought leaders in Ireland today, the bridge between the private sector and the public sector. The government listens to everything he says, so you're very welcome, Danny. Next we have Seamus Coffey. Now, Seamus is a hero and deserves a very special welcome today because Dan O'Brien was supposed to be here, but he pulled a sickie. So I rang Seamus. I said, Seamus, do you mind driving up from Cork on Thursday morning? And he said, no problem. So all the way from Cork this morning, thank you. And unlike Danny, the government never listens to a word Seamus says. So thoughts and prayers about that. The other advantage of Dan not coming was he had insisted on the presidential suite in the hotel here last night, while I had been shipped out to a humble B&B miles from here. So I got Dan's room. So that was also a good thing about Dan not being able to come. But we wish him well and hope he recovers. And then finally, Professor Martina Lawless, who I'm really delighted to welcome because she is the incoming head of the ESRI. Martina, you're very welcome and congratulations on the position. So look, that previous panel was fantastic, and, Bridget in particular was raising a lot of issues there around, instability and the unstable world that we're in. And the title of the panel is Ireland's Business Model 2.0. But that implies that the 1.0 model is failing us. So I'm going to ask Seamus maybe to kick off with a comment on, how badly, do you rate the risks on the trade war and on tariffs? Is this something that we really do need to be concerned about? Might it blow over, or is that river of corporation tax finally going to turn into a trickle?
Is it something we should be concerned about? Absolutely. But not necessarily because of the tariffs themselves. So we'll come back to that. More so due to the uncertainty that's been generated in the environment at the moment. Uncertainty in terms of investment, uncertainty in terms of what firms are going to do. And in many cases, firms will have paused while all this sort of literally craziness plays out. So the big impact, at least over the short and near term, is the uncertainty being created by the current policy uncertainty. On the tariffs, why not necessarily have the tariffs as being up front and centre? Well, one, it's all the US. The talk of tariffs is all emanating just from one person within the US. So it really is only US trade that has been impacted, and two, it's all goods. All the talk about tariffs is on the good side. Unless Donald Trump can kick it and move it around, he's not interested. So on the services side, which are important for Ireland, there's pretty much no talk of restrictions or trade barriers there. And when it comes to the tariffs and the impact on the US, of course, from an Irish perspective, we have a very significant interest because of the huge presence of US multinationals here, particularly when it comes to high-end manufacturing. But again, if you look at traditionally, over the last 30, 40 years, while these companies have been here, in many cases they came to Ireland to service international markets. Ireland was to be the outpost where they went to Europe and other international markets, and it wasn't necessarily the case that they were coming to Ireland to manufacture products to sell back into the US. Now that has changed over the last 10 years. If you were to look at the trade data 10 years ago, the US wouldn't have been high up. Yes, we'd have had some amount of trade, but it wouldn't have been huge. Over the last number of years, that number has ballooned, and there are now very significant exports in monetary terms going from Ireland to the US. But you must look at two elements of that. The numbers are huge, tens of billions of pharmaceutical exports going from Ireland to the US. But two things. One to note is the volume, how big is this stuff? And the second thing to note is the employment intensity. How many jobs are involved in these exports that we're sending back to the US? And actually in both cases, although we don't have definitive numbers, it's likely that the numbers are quite small. the volume of active ingredients that are manufactured here that are being sent back to the US, the volume, the weight of them is actually quite small. And in large part, they're going from Ireland to the US as part of the production process. It's not that we're making the pills that are being sold to patients in the US. We're making the active ingredient that's going to the next stage of the production process in the US, and maybe from the US going on somewhere else. So there's huge interconnections. And second is the labour intensity. Yes, pharmaceutical manufacturing is important in Ireland, but of the people employed in that sector, to what extent are the jobs dependent on making stuff in Ireland and then selling it on to the US? The value has grown hugely in recent years, but it's likely, like lots of things, like the corporation tax that Sarah referenced, that it's very, very concentrated. That there are certain new superstar drugs that have come on stream, and the companies have set up their first manufacturing facility in Ireland, particularly these new weight loss drugs, diabetes and weight loss drugs. In many cases, some of the only places in the world where they can be manufactured. The plants are now open in Ireland. We might come back to infrastructure and issues with planning, but it does seem when it comes to pharmaceutical plants, particularly plants that are already in existence, they seem to be able to change use and move to the new compounds pretty quickly, much quicker than they can in the US and other countries. So when these new superstar drugs come online, they'll probably be manufactured first in Ireland. So I'd say if we were to look at the sort of concentration of our exports to the US, it could be limited to 3, 4, 5 drugs. There might be factories making lots of stuff in Ireland that actually aren't directly impacted. But what is an impact would be the uncertainty. So it's not necessarily the tariffs themselves, although a 30% tariff would be hugely detrimental, and talk of a 200% tariff in pharmaceuticals, it's incomprehensible what that would do. Like if you're dealing with tens of billions and you put a 200% tariff on it, the numbers become catastrophic. But like the way all this is being played out in public, it's very bizarre. So I think the uncertainty is huge. The tariffs themselves, not necessarily the key issue. Like the companies are here to trade with the rest of the world. Some of the superstar drugs are quite limited. Maybe their supply systems can change. But I just think the uncertainty will be done. It's bizarre. This is policy uncertainty. And usually uncertainty comes from the economy and from actors. This is policy uncertainty.
And a quick follow-up on that. Is the Irish government's view that the EU should refrain from retaliating against Trump, is that a reflection of its wish to accommodate the MNCs, or a more shrewd sense of how best to negotiate with the White House?
Is there a best way to negotiate with the White House? It's hard to know. Like when it comes to trade policy, the traditional view would be that you go tit for tat.
Yeah.
That if somebody comes and imposes tariffs on your goods, goods coming from your jurisdiction, you will apply on a similar basis. And that this was typically done on the way down. If you cut here, we'll cut here, and you get down to a more reasonable level of tariff. Like tariffs exist, and Ireland has used tariffs historically. Back in the 20s and 30s, we imposed tariffs, and Cork got the likes of Ford and Dunlop's being tariff jumpers. So we can't say that this is a completely unheard of strategy, but the world over the last number of decades has moved away from it. The Irish view would perhaps be somewhat different to the traditional view, the view that you do respond tit for tat, that you do make it costly for a country to impose tariffs on your good. Are we doing it to placate the multinationals? I'm hard to know. I think the multinationals would like the tariffs to be removed, and not one that sees them there on a long-term basis. I think there's no right answer. There's no right answer because we don't know what we're dealing with in the White House.
Okay, but Danny, it does feel like with all this going on, Ireland is not helping itself. And Bridget was raising this point about the Occupied Territories Bill. Now, Fergal O'Brien from IBEC was in yesterday at the Oireachtas Committee on Foreign Affairs and was talking about the risks that has to the MNCs and to trade. So what are your concerns about that bill?
Well first of all, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Apologies. First of all, the decision has been made. Sorry, decisions has been made. So. Sorry,
what decision?
So our international perception versus Israel is now done. That's not going to go back. We've revealed our hand and our intention. So that ship has sailed. They're now talking about the matter of the detail in the Occupied Territories Bill, and at the moment, it's on goods. And the value of trade last year that we're talking about is 240,000 euros. Right? We're not talking about millions here, we're talking really small. So this is not about actually helping in any material way. It's symbolism and moral positions and so on. However, with moral positions, you can also reveal hypocrisy. And I believe that our foreign policy is damaging us because it is hypocritical.
In what way?
Because we've had the advantages that we just talked about in terms of our resources. And through the 45 years in MacGill, you can be P&P, poor and popular. You can be rich and responsible. You can't be rich and trying to be popular. It doesn't work. And if we've taken the riches, we now have to go with the responsibility. And our foreign policy positioning, while well-intentioned, is causing us significant damage. Quantifying it is really difficult. But we know it has going to have consequences for us. The consequences, though, aren't just from the United States and the Israeli position. We've been completely insensitive to our other European colleagues who've also had really significant issues, including our nearest neighbours in Britain, who've had the tensions in their societies of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in recent years as well. And they have to go sensitively through that, and particularly in Europe as well. But we seem to be insensitive to that kind of dynamic. And so our goodwill in Europe, in my direct experience, I go there a lot in business communities, are seeing that Ireland is being left behind. And I'm sure we'll come on to in a moment. Tragically, Europe now has to militarise in defence, resilience and security. Whatever euphemisms we want to put on the words have now become a material business issue in Europe from all the schemes we talked about, the SAFE and etc. As recently as 2 weeks ago, under the umbrella of Business Europe, on the margins of NATO, member state countries were invited to the business conversation around that issue. We weren't invited because we're not aligned. It's not an argument for joining NATO, but it's an argument to saying that the next 10 years in Europe are going to be spectacular in terms of a Marshall Plan level of investment. Tragically, it's going to be on militarisation. But right now, as a business community, talking about Model 2.0, we're currently lagging and we don't have many supporters bringing us along the way. And interestingly, Brexit was mentioned earlier on. This is a route back, a very clear route back to the centre of Europe for Britain. And we're going in exactly the wrong direction. Our goodwill, people might think we've got high moral grounds of goodwill, and that is true. In terms of the business and economics, our goodwill is eroding significantly and substantially. And for Business 2.0, I don't know what the quantification of that will be, but I know it's happening.
Right. Martina, so the 1.0, FDI, education, all the corporation tax, it's worked out for us. Do we need a 2.0? Like, we're talking about the risks here, but is it fundamentally strong enough, or that there's so much space in it we can afford to take a hit and still be okay? Do we need to change what we're doing?
I think the fundamentals of the Irish economic model have actually been very, very strong, and they've paid off extremely well for us. So if you take the fundamentals as being an openness to international trade, an openness to investment, acting as essentially a bridge between US multinationals feeding into the European market, into the broader global market, underpinning that domestically by investment in education, by attracting high-value jobs and research and development. All of that has been extremely successful. If you look at just employment numbers, we have more than 1 million more people at work today than we did 25 years ago. You can't argue that that is not a phenomenal rate of growth in an economy. Where the current economic model has a problem is actually that we've grown so fast and so successfully, and we haven't kept up with that in terms of the public resources and the public infrastructure. So to use a somewhat trite analogy, we're like a child who's just like had a major growth spurt. And that's great news, but now all our clothes are too small.
Yeah.
We just have not kept up with the infrastructure needed all across the board. Housing is the most obvious and immediate one, but I know Sean will come in with more detail on this. All across the board, we have not kept up, particularly, I'd say, in publicly provided, but also in private investment. The Fiscal Council under Seamus have done some work comparing Ireland to other small countries with equivalent levels of income, and we're like 25% below their levels of infrastructure. So there is an issue there where we haven't kept up with the growth in population and the growth in employment. The other area where perhaps the model hasn't delivered quite as well as people would have hoped has been in how broadly based and inclusive it is. It is a risky model. It's very concentrated in a small number of companies, which brings up issues on the tax space, but it's also very concentrated regionally. So like a lot of these are big clusters of tech and pharma sectors. So if you kind of look kind of like at the regional balance of the country, obviously being based here in Donegal, maybe this is particularly noticeable. The model hasn't been kind of as broad-based regionally, and it hasn't been as broad-based in terms of supporting the growth of the domestic businesses as we would have liked it to be. If you look back at, you know, every single kind of policy model from the Department of Enterprise talks about spillovers from multinationals to domestic firms and, you know, knowledge transfers, and it's always a policy that's there in sort of hope, but it hasn't really delivered, I think, in expectation. In fact, almost the opposite. The multinationals are there; they can pay the higher wages that allow their workers to maybe outbid in terms of house prices and so on. So in actual fact, there's probably been a slightly negative spillover effect on the price level.
Is that right there then, our weakness and the threat? That, to me, it almost feels like we're in 2006 again, that you've this narrow tax base. We're lashing out money, you know, to regular middle-class folks. And I wrote about this last week in my column in the Irish Independent, and I said I was reminded of Seamus at the Cure at Troy, who says we are condemned to repeat ourselves on our every last mistake. Are you looking at what's happening now, that we're repeating the mistakes of the Tiger on a slightly different basis, but the fundamental error?
I think the fundamental error that we're placing too much weight of the tax base on a very small. In 2006, it was construction. Now it's a small number of multinationals, and it means that regardless of, you know, sort of tariffs and broad-based kind of threats to the economy, we're exposed to very idiosyncratic decisions about single companies deciding that they're going to reorder, maybe for tax reasons, maybe for other reasons, to change their location, to change their business model. We have a very, very narrow base, particularly on the corporate tax side, but also on the income tax side as well. A lot of it is very concentrated on a kind of a very small percentage of the taxpayers. And we're dealing with a lot of constraints in the economy, but very unusually the constraints are not absence of money. When it comes again to the infrastructure issues, there's lots of money there. Our problems is having the people and the trade-offs and the hard decisions on what you're going to prioritise.
I often think of Tommy Tiernan saying in The Bust, sure, the money never really suited us at all. So Sean, we have had all this money, and as Martina so nicely described, you know, we had the growth spurt, the infrastructure couldn't keep up. Is that understandable, that it couldn't keep up? Or were there errors of judgment made in not investing sooner, and perhaps might they have been a consequence of the bust that Deeper, who love to say no, were understandably cautious? What's your take been on that infrastructure gap?
Well, I think Martina put it very well, you know, that we haven't delivered the infrastructure that we need to reflect the fact that the economy has grown and the population has grown. And it's widely recognised that this is a problem. That's a good start. The Academy of Engineering, the architects, the surveyors, IBEC, Seamus's outfit, IFAC, even the IMF have all commented on this and said, you know, something is lacking. So the question arises, what's to be done?
Yeah.
And in view of the uncertainty around the future tax flow and income for the state, what I would recommend is that we would try and focus on maybe 5 or 6 projects that are absolutely crucial. I'd call them early wins. I'm not saying they're easy wins, but they need to be done. And I'll itemise those. I mean, the first one would be the water supply for Dublin, which is on a knife edge. It hasn't even gone to planning yet. When I was in practice as a consulting engineer, I worked on it 15 years ago. It's still not really progressed very far. Greater Dublin drainage, wastewater treatment for North Dublin. That's just got planning. That really needs to move on, because if it doesn't, you're not going to be able to facilitate extra housing in North Dublin.
And I think that one was 20 years we were waiting on that one. It was mad. Yeah.
I can't remember exactly the number of years, but it's been stuck in legal mire for the last 7 years. Then there are a number of other fairly pivotal projects which would help housing and industrial development in Cork. There's two, the North Cork Ring Road and then the Great Island access. I mean, that would free up a lot of property in, say, the Cork Docklands. And then the North Ring Road, of course, needs to happen in Cork to facilitate the M20, which is the last piece of major motorway infrastructure that we need. Another one then would be the Limerick North Ring Road, because again, without that, you can't develop housing in Limerick. So our thinking on that is that if you focus on a couple of projects like that, on the energy side, I'd add the North-South Interconnector. If you focus on projects like that, you gain momentum and you get a bit of traction and you get a bit of belief that we can get things done. Because there is a kind of a riff out there now that we can't get things done and that everything is jammed up.
Yeah, but you say the North-South Interconnector, and I think that's a perfect example. You know, so this is the North-South power line. At the moment, we've only one between North and South that they have to run at 20% capacity because it's unstable. But that interconnector has been delayed because people along that route, all up through kind of Monaghan, Cav and up there, are protesting against it. There's been no political support for it. ESB networks have the constitutional power to get CPOs for access, and it's just stalled because of protesters. And we come up against this again and again and again, where people are protesting against important infrastructure and they don't realise what they've done until suddenly a company can't get an energy connection. So what's been going on there?
Well, in that particular project, you're right, there has been a lot of well, I suppose hypocrisy wouldn't be too strong a word, where you've had politicians object to it because their constituents are unhappy about it.
There. Yeah.
So I think some of this does go back, though, to the lack of explanation that developers, whether it's the state or private, offer to because engineers and scientists are not particularly good at explaining what they're doing or why they want to do it. And I think we need a bit more engagement on that, and that certainly would be helpful. But I mean, we can look to achievements in the past where things have been delivered, and we can be proud of them, and we can build confidence from that, I hope, and momentum.
And which would you stand out and say, look, we did that, we can do more?
Well, I mean, it goes back to the Donegal water, the Varty water scheme in the 19th century. Dublin had the best wastewater treatment plant in Europe, probably by the early 1900s. The Ardnacrusha plant, which was a hydroelectric scheme, which was finished in 1929, and we'd just come out of, 3 wars, and we were absolutely bust. But that led to rural electrification. The roads network, we've done almost 1,000 kilometres of motorways between 1995 and 2010. We're rolling out the broadband at the moment. 500,000 premises, I think, 1.5 million people, something like that. So we can justifiably say that we can get things done. The planning system, of course, is a problem. We do have a new Planning Act, but a lot of it is not enacted. In other words, the statutory instruments are not in place to make the Act work. So we need to move on that. So,
Danny, I mean, I think there's absolute consensus on this. We need to put the foot down on infrastructure. The planning system has been a problem. On Commission, Planola has been reconstructed now. Peter Mullen is the CEO there. I think he's doing a smashing job clearing a backlog. Is it enough? Pick up your mic there. And tell the people.
Thank you for reminding me.
Can we crack this infrastructure piece in the next 5 years? And if so, how? If we want this 2.0, we need energy, we need water.
So, 2 parts, right?
Right.
First of all, it is not just a nice to have. Our infrastructure is very vulnerable. Our resilience to attack is very, very vulnerable. We've lots of points of failure with bad actors. And so there's a real sensitivity here on whether our business model can function in an attack situation. I'm not talking about boots on grounds. I'm talking about tax on our water system, a tax on our energy system, our grid system. And so when we have discussions about defence, security and resilience, we're not talking about things happening in foreign countries. We're talking about our society and the dangers we've had. We've seen it at the HSC attack as one, and that should have been, to Bridget's point earlier about learning things in the global context, we've had plenty of warnings about the resilience issues that we're facing. And our part in terms of the defence more widely, there were 14 sea cables in our jurisdiction that we've no idea of how we even go down and have a look at them, because we don't have a submarine. And we also need that primary radar system. So the debate about neutrality and defence believes it to be somewhere else. It's actually got to do with our infrastructure. So it's not just a nice to have. It's actually material and critical, particularly in the world we just talked about in the first session. The bit I would like to bring those, and I have confidence that the physical thing can get done. The bit I'd like to talk about, though, is the money piece of all this. And no small part of us not getting on with it is that we're diverting resources to much more conspicuous consumption type of activities. But we also have had now for a decade this notion of pretending to be poor and convincing the government. I'll give you one fact. Nobody listens to me, by the way. They might hear me. They might hear me, but they don't listen. Is that when I started this, I'm about 8 years old now. When I started this, it was 115 billion. It's now 160 billion. Last night in the Irish banking system, Irish households had 160 billion on deposit.
Yeah.
Now try opening a bank account. You know what bedroom you're sleeping at this point, right? So last night we'd even know who had the money, if we were really in the big brother state, because we know from just opening a bank account the amount of detail. That transpires to be about, on average, 80,000 euros per household. That's a population, we're certain of that. The politicians went on a natural sampling for us during the general election. So when they were grabbing and grinning, every time you saw them in a photograph shaking hands with somebody, statistically, they were shaking hands with somebody from a household at 80,000 euros, and yet that household member convinced them the country was poor and needed supplement from a cost of living crisis that we're experiencing. And because we've allowed that narrative to develop, we don't get the resources towards the infrastructure. And even if we overpay on the infrastructure, we have never yet regretted a project that went over time and over budget, be the Port Tunnel, the motorways, the Children's Hospital when it opened. And so if we don't get the maturity of actually acknowledging that we're rich and stop behaving like nouveau riche and actually be sensible with the wealth, well, then I think that would be the problem in terms of getting the infrastructure done.
Now, of course, Seamus, now we know that's an average of 80,000, so some people won't have that, but others will have 3 or 4 times that. But the point there is we're spending too much on current expenditure and we're still not investing enough in infrastructure, Seamus. So, do you see any shift at deeper level that they need to make that switch? And do you see any sense that the government needs to make that switch and they're willing to cut off the tap on cash payments to people who don't need it?
Yeah, so I think on that, whether we're spending too much or too little on where is maybe hard to pin down, but I think one thing we've been doing poorly, very poorly over the last number of years, is actually budgeting for all the money we have. We spoke about the corporation tax, the income tax that the government is getting. Tax revenues are pouring in at an enormous rate, but equally they're going out at probably as a quicker rate. Yes, we're running modest enough surpluses, but it has been poorly budgeted. So the Fiscal Council has been established to sort of overview and look at the government's budgets on an annual basis and offer an opinion on that. But one thing we see year on year is that what we get presented with in October, and the budget for the following year, is a large part of a work that's only sort of a template and is thrown away as we progress through the following year. So for the last number of years, the government have had this idea of trying to stick to 5% increases in current spending and the impact of tax changes on a year-to-year basis. And pretty much every budget, when presented in October, gets close to that. So the budget set out for each year has spending and tax changes in and around that. But once we go through the following year, the year for which the budget should be set, we end up with a figure of 8, 9, 10% as additional policy measures are introduced. Like, in terms of the Fiscal Council, we're looking forward to October's budget, which is Budget 2026. But actually, we should possibly be more concerned with all the policy that will be introduced in 2025, which was supposed to be the budget we had last October. We saw it last year that as we progressed through the year, a huge range of measures were introduced. And whereas when the Fiscal Council assessed the budget for 2025, you might say, yeah, that seems okay. But if you have hundreds of millions and in some cases billions of announcements that progress through the year, well, actually your assessment should be that current spending is growing very, very rapidly. And it's not to say that that's wrong, but if we're going to do it, let's do it in a planned fashion. So one issue we had in Ireland is our very short-term budgeting, and it used to be that we did budget on an annual basis. But recently we've been doing budgeting like on a quarter, even a monthly basis, where any time a politician saw a lectern, they were up making policy announcements with additional money being spent. Now, when the money is coming in, that doesn't seem to be a huge problem. But if the money dries up and if you have difficulty maybe borrowing, that could be the issue. So I think the issue with our current spending is not necessarily the level that we've been doing too much of it, and that maybe is a different level of assessment. It's just that we haven't been planning it. And if we could say, oh, we're putting 5, 6, 7 billion to current spending this year and only additional 1 billion into capital spending, well, then you could have various organisations say that's not the appropriate balance. But actually, if you look at the budget, it might be additional 2 or 3 billion for current and 1 billion for capital. I think maybe we are getting the balance right. But you progress through the year, get all the various policy announcements that are introduced, and that balance changes. And some of it is bizarre. Like in the Fiscal Council, we know we've great insight in the Fiscal Council, and we know Christmas happens every year. We established the Fiscal Council established, yes. What happens when it comes to Christmas and social welfare payments? There was a double social welfare payment around Christmas. We know this happens every year. We're now in the middle of July. That's still not in the figures for 2025. There'll be an announcement. A politician will see a lectern at some stage and will make an announcement. Yes, we're now going to do the double social welfare.
So does this mean that the term prudent Pascal is one of the greatest misnomers in Irish politics?
I think when we listen to the narrative that's been out there, yes, that's what's been suggested. And if you read the budgets and look at the budgets, it might appear that. But more importantly, look at the outturns. And the outturns don't necessarily back up that. If you're saying you're going to keep current spending and tax increases to around 5% per annum, and you're doing 8, 9, 10, that's very different. Come out and say we're going to do 10, and let's analyse that. Don't have the view out there that we're at 5% annual increase when actually doing 10. Come out and say 10, and let's see what people
Danny,
want to say about that. Because if something grows at 10% a year, it doubles every 7 years and quadruples every 14.
That's maths. Marty, I'll come to you in a sec, but Danny, you just want to back in on that.
Just bounce back.
Yeah.
And so Seamus is correct, right? However, what we have to acknowledge is that while the Irish government has huge surpluses relative to other governments, its own surpluses relatively pales against its own private sector. The private sector in Ireland can outbid the government day in, day out, and has been doing so when it comes for resources, for electing a MEC, for building commercial property, for putting extensions onto houses, for privately getting children minded compared to in public funded creches, to the million extra people in the workforce, nearly all of them private sector. The public sector as a relative share is diminished. We also have to acknowledge that. That's the problems we're experiencing are created by us, the citizens. And so just because the government have surpluses, they're actually ineffective when they go to market. The Children's Hospital was being built while Intel were putting 17 billion euros down the road during the same time frame, sucking up a lot of those resources. And if you look the other direction down the river, you see all the property developing there, which is great. I represent that.
And actually, Sean,
it is a reality.
I'm going to come to you on supply chains, Sean, but Martina, so 2.0. So we've identified the problems here, we can see the risks, we know what we've done wrong. So what would you do differently?
I think the first element, and this builds in very much to the infrastructure point and to Danny's point that the private sector has a lot more kind of bidding power often, is the job of the public sector should be to put in the foundations, the guardrails, the guidelines that allow the private sector to develop and deliver a lot of the infrastructure, particularly in housing. The government cannot and should not be providing housing to everybody in the country. It's just beyond its scope. What the government can do is put in place a planning system, a regulatory system that is streamlined and efficient and that cuts the costs for delivery to allow the private sector or public-private partnerships for maybe bigger projects like water to progress. And there we have systems that are very, very clunky and very complicated. Our planning system is one of the only ones in Europe that has these multiple stages of zoning, of consultation, of planning permissions, of appeals.
Yeah, like most of the countries in Europe have no third-party appeal system. If you go over the border to Derry, there is no third-party appeal system. Like, we're really weird in the way that we do this.
I from Donegal can put in an objection
Yeah.
to something being built here in Glenties and vice versa. And
But Martina, you've been a close observer, say, of the public sector. Like, one thing I really do see is, look, it doesn't matter what system you have. If you have a culture with the fear of decision-making, you're never going to get anywhere. Now, to be fair, I think that's a product of Oireachtas committees kicking the hell out of people for making decisions and shaming people when a decision is made that goes wrong. But making no decision is the biggest risk in society. Now, do you observe that in the public sector? Is that a fair criticism, that there's paralysis?
I think that is a fair criticism. I think
Yeah.
there's a feeling that, until the project is perfect, it's been totally scoped out, you've done 20 different layers of analysis, you're nervous about making a decision. And there doesn't seem to be any sense in which you get criticised in the public sector for not doing something. But if you do something like the National Children's Hospital that goes over budget and gets delayed, then you're in front of the Public Accounts Committee every 6 months. But big projects like that do go over. Internationally, there's lots of evidence that large one-off projects are, they're very complicated. A country might only do one every 50 years. They're very hard to price. I'm sure Sean on the engineering side will agree with me there. So there needs to be a little bit of risk-taking and a bit of a sense that we can't always let the sort of perfect be the enemy of the good.
Do you think there's a way to incentivise decision-making and get people to have a little bit of room to make a mistake? How do we change that public sector culture?
I think culture is hard to change, but I think having maybe a little bit more criticism of where things don't get done and a little bit more deadline on, we have a population that's now X% bigger, we need to build the infrastructure. But you can see the pressure is now coming on externally. If houses can't be built because the drainage system and the water delivery to Dublin aren't there, you will have more pressure that those decisions need to be taken. And I think the structures that are there really need to be streamlined quite considerably. In my opinion, zoning needs to be taken much more seriously. If an area is zoned for housing at a particular density or whatever, there shouldn't be any great uncertainty that you will then not get planning permission. But every layer is taken completely independently and with no kind of links together. And that slows down every step of the process in terms of delivery.
Yeah, I actually work in major projects in my day job, and there's this rule by Ben Flubier, who's the world's global scholar on major projects, and he calls it the iron law of major projects. They go over budget, over time, and under-deliver on benefits over and over again. So it's not just Ireland, Sean. But what's happening now is what I'm hearing from investors, particularly in the areas of like transport and offshore, is that investors are running from Ireland. They don't want to get involved because we're seen as a country that just isn't serious, and in particular that we do not make our minds up and we don't make those tough decisions. So I know that you work with a lot of people in that whole infrastructure world. Is that what you're hearing?
I think that's overstating it a bit, but there is some unease about our inability to make a decision and stick to it and get it done. Sorry, that sounds like Boris Johnson. But I mean, we do need to get things done. And I think part of the problem, and I hope Seamus would agree, is that we don't have multi-annual budgeting for projects.
That's true.
And everything is almost decided on a monthly basis as to what project gets what money. That's not efficient. The other thing is the procurement system is very much, the public procurement system is focused on price. So what is happening is contractors are coming along, bidding low, and then before the job starts, the first claim is in, that's not good. The focus has to be on quality.
And that's a lack of expertise writing tenders on the public sector side, I think, isn't it?
To an extent,
yes.
Although we do have an Office of Government Procurement, but maybe that needs to be taken a look at. I think Another area where we could actually improve is under the Planning Act, you can have a statutory instrument which specifies that a specific project or projects are of strategic importance and should be expedited as a result. If that was in place, I think it would certainly help.
So bolder, more radical action on those. Come here. It's 1 o'clock and we're supposed to finish at 15:15. So I better let the audience in. Great. Oh, Dermot, how are you? It's Dermot Lacey. Can we get a mic down here? It wouldn't be MacGill unless Dermot offered us a gem of wisdom. Dermot, I noticed South County Dublin Council reduced the rate on their property taxes. So
Dublin City Council, the council I'm a member
stand up there to see it.
Dublin City Council, the one that I'm a member of, will increase it tonight.
Oh, that's something new. Great.
I just want to ask two questions.
Yeah.
The first is in the issue of infrastructure. What are the view of the panellists of our current departmental structure? My own view is that deeper has now simply become an additional brake. There was a role for it during the crash. I don't believe there's a role for it anymore. The second one, as a councillor for over 30 years, I think one of the best things that could happen in this country would be that the Department of Housing and Local Government was simply abolished.
Yeah.
It is dysfunctional, it is anti-democratic, it has stopped infrastructure development, it serves no positive purpose in this country. And the second question, I think it was John referred to politicians taking populist stances. And that's the role of the media. If I oppose something, I will get headlines in The Independent.
Yes.
If I support something, nobody will mention me at all. So the benefit for the politician is to oppose. The downside is that society loses out on constructive political leaders. So there is a role for the media in engaging constructively with those politicians who want to be constructive rather than those who get all the coverage for opposing everything. So the media have a role to play here as well.
You know what, you're dead right. I'll take that. And I can tell you that the media is consciously cynical about that, because we know, especially in the attention society and the clickable society, angry emotive headlines will get more clicks than sober ones, and it's really is commercial. I'm going to mind your point about the departments, and there's another question down here. I'll take three together. So take this one here and then yourself, and then we get a quick answers, and then I will come to you then. We'll get everybody in if we can. Yeah, and then there's a man down there at the back as well. So we'll take you first, so since you got it first. Yeah. Tell us who you are.
My name is Neil O'Sullivan.
Hi, Neil.
My question is about Ireland's semiconductor business.
Oh, yes.
Which was alluded to, I think, in some of the questions. But back towards the end of May, the Minister Burke, announced Ireland's semiconductor strategy, and he talked about Ireland becoming a Silicon Island. And, he also talked about large investment or mega sites where we might attract foreign investment into to build new semiconductor fabs and so on. And I think it's worth mentioning that most of the semiconductor industry in Ireland at the moment is very much US multinationals. There are some Europeans, but predominantly US multinationals. Of course, with US tariffs and so on, this is now a big concern. Taiwan is a country in Southeast Asia, a population of about 24 million. They are number one in the world for semiconductor production. They produce about 90% of semiconductors, 60%. 90% of the world's top semiconductors and about 60% of general semiconductor production. There are many EU states with trade offices in Taiwan. I think 15 other EU states have trade offices in Taiwan, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, so on. They all have offices there. They're trying to build relationships and partner with Taiwan on this technology. We closed our office. Ireland closed our trade office in Taiwan in 2012, and we haven't had the vision to reopen it since. And now that we want to become a Silicon Island, I guess my question to you is, isn't it about time we considered reopening our trade office and building connections with the number one Silicon Island in the world, Taiwan, and diversifying our trade links and FDI?
Okay, and then I'll take the one down at the back, and we'll take those, and then I'll do a second round then. And stand up there, good man.
Yeah, Colin Shuttle's my name. I was here many years ago, and the late Eddie O'Connor spoke here. about infrastructure. And
yes.
And he said Donegal and Mayo are the two windiest counties in Ireland. And the power is, we curtailed 400 million worth of wind energy last year because we have no transmission lines.
Exactly.
To take the power from Donegal. But so we have to look at doing storage in Donegal. Turlough Hill was built 50 years ago. I doubt if you get planning for something like that now. So we have to develop our green hydrogen industry because there's nowhere for power to go, and battery storage to help. But also, I mean, is there any forward planning? I mean, when the motorway was built from Dublin to Belfast, I mean, it was an ideal way to put pylons along all those motorways and not taking the tourist route.
Well, I think, it stops north of the border. Do you know, we might get onto the A5, actually. I know Sean wants to talk about that. So your point.
But the Irish that left here in the 50s and 60s and 70s built the infrastructure in London. They're working down in Sizewell. The local man's working in Sizewell doing the tunnels for the nuclear power plant. They're running infrastructure in London. What's wrong? Have we too many academics in this country? Are we not enough practical people? You know, I think this question has to be asked.
Okay, let me see. Who wants to answer the department one? Because it was an idea for Department of Infrastructure. Seamus, maybe I'll go to you on that. It's just, okay, Sean, quick word in there.
Well, I think that point is well made. Deeper was the department for saying no and stopping everything, but it does have infrastructure as part of its responsibility now. So maybe the name needs to change from Department of Public Infrastructure Department of Public Expenditure, and lead with the Department of Infrastructure Delivery. And they have shown some ability to engage on that. I know that they had IBEC in there recently. The Academy was asked in, as were the surveyors and the architects, to specify what are the barriers to delivery. And there is a delivery task force headed by...
So were you at one of those round tables that they had recently? Now, I heard with someone who was at that saying, look, it was grand, but is it just a talking shop? Is anything going to happen?
That remains to be seen. I mean,
right.
we did get a very sympathetic hearing, but then again, the people across the table from us were from the agencies who deliver stuff.
Yes.
There weren't, too many...
So what's your level of confidence in Jack Chambers and how well he means it?
That's a very nice, easy question. Thanks, Sarah.
Answer it, Sean. You were there, you were in the room. Yeah, do you believe them?
I do, yeah.
Okay, that's an answer.
I do believe
I want to go to Seamus on the government departments and Dermot's point. We're always mixing around departments after every general election, and it feels more like it's about dividing up the jobs rather than any making coherent government sense. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's certainly merit in that. Like, we do seem to like putting additional layers in, particularly at the centre, whether it's a housing czar or the Department of Infrastructure, as was mooted during the general election. It just seems to be, as Martina's gone, another layer to go through on that side. And like we talk about sort of the structure of government in Ireland and that local government has significant power, but the country is small. Like, even our central government is taking care of a relatively small population in global terms. Like, we frequently make the point between the population of Ireland and the population of Greater Manchester, and Greater Manchester has a local government. Like, you compare that, our central government is dealing with the same population. So we should be able to manage those decisions in a better fashion and get them done much quicker. I think one of the key issues when it comes to infrastructure is just the involvement of the legal system, just that additional layer. And really, what you look at the legal system to do is to ensure, like, was the law being followed? So if a planning application needs an environmental study, like, really all the legal system should do is there an environmental study? Yes or no, and we move on. It shouldn't be a case of going through it line by line to see, they didn't ask this question, they didn't deal with this particular issue. Like, we get experts to do these environmental studies. Judges aren't the experts. It's like as if there was a criminal case and the judge went through a sort of a transcript between a guard and a person of interest and throws out the entire case because the guard didn't ask a particular question. Like, is it the judge's job to judge what the questions that are important are? The guard was doing the investigation. The person undertaking the environmental impact study has done the environmental impact study, but he's to go through hundreds of pages to make sure every question has been asked to try and get it through the legal system. So I think the scope, the expansion of the legal system into planning has been an issue. Yes, the law should absolutely be followed, but we seem to have taken it to an extreme.
Or would you round up the judges and bring them in for a little chat?
No, I think it's based on precedent. That's how these things evolve. And like, if a particular judge or a particular case has gone through the environmental impact statement and study to see is it in their view correct? Well, they're all going to do it.
Yeah, they call it procedure fetish. And there was actually one project that was stopped recently over a BAT survey. The BAT survey was done, it just hadn't been published, and they stopped the project. Martina, departments and that offshore piece, we haven't given it enough attention yet, but in terms of a vision for Ireland, like there really is a massive opportunity there. Offshore energy, we can talk about exporting the energy or keeping it on the island to drive manufacturing businesses, or people are talking about hydrogen. Has ESRI been looking into that and the potential there and how feasible it is?
So we do have a group of people who look at energy policy and at kind of the developments there. I think there is a degree of scepticism that the ambitions can be delivered.
Right.
Not that they couldn't be delivered or that there wouldn't be great potential there, but that given the planning system, given the uncertainty in the process, given our absence of ports that can actually facilitate the building of these offshore platforms, that the idea that we will have, I think the ambition is something like 5 gigawatt by 2030.
It's huge.
There is just absolutely no way that can be delivered unless there's a major change in decision making.
And again, there's challenges there, like those turbines are so big. China is where they're made and they don't even have ships big enough yet to ship them here. It's an extraordinary challenge. The semiconductors, obviously we think Intel, and I live in Enfield down the road from Leixlip, and Intel have started making people redundant. It's a company in trouble. Is there merit in the point there about Taiwan? Would that help us at all, or is NVIDIA just coming to crush Intel anyway, and Intel is screwed in the long term as a company, never mind the Irish angle?
Yeah, so on the multitude of things I'm on the trade advisory group, and so semiconductors was part of that conversation recently. Yes, Intel are huge and they are going through a bad patch, but the sophistication of that site, even if it's not Intel's name on it, it won't be a redundant site. It's just so state of the art. So whose name on it is kind of a moot point. Also, a lot of people don't know this, but analog devices is huge in Ireland. A lot of people think analog is gone, or it was.
Yeah,
it's a huge,
it feels like a name from the 70s or something.
It's a huge part of modernity in semiconductors. US company, though. Yes, US companies. But therein lies the rub, is that we generally are seeing that on the mains aspect, when you talk about Taiwan, and I was in Taiwan in 2012 actually, when there's quite a bit of detente between mainland China and Taiwan, changed since, is the dangers is that Taiwan, the world is de-risking, because the EU CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States is that the production of chips will take place in the big zones. It's hard to see, no disrespect to Taiwan, Taiwan will be seen as a safe place for the manufacturing.
Because of the China problem.
In the medium term.
Oh dear. Okay, well look, we'll talk about that over lunch. More questions. One over here. Hi. Oh, you were just yawning. No, okay, sorry. I know, there's a mic coming for you. Sorry. I thought it was like an auction where someone just goes like this and suddenly they've bought something. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
It's Lisa, I'm Lisa O'Carroll from The Guardian.
Oh, Lisa, hello, how are you? Yeah.
My first time here, so very pleased to be here. Yeah. Just a general question, picking up on something Martina said. You said one of the risks this time around, as opposed to the Celtic Tiger, was that decisions could rely on... the economy could rely on decisions of one or two companies. So let's say one or two companies do downgrade their investment like a Pfizer or a Johnson. What's the impact of that? And then the second question, just more generally, maybe to Seamus and to Danny, is what do you think is the highest tariff that Irish businesses can actually eat, absorb? There's talk of maybe the negotiations settling at around 15%. Is that viable in Ireland?
Okay. Everybody remember those questions, and I will take two more. So there's a man here in the middle, and then, we've loads. I'll take you there, the glasses, and then I will promise to come to you after this round, okay? It's 13 minutes past, so concise answers when we come to you. Now, where is that man gone? Stand up there. There you are. Great. A nice brief question as well, please.
Martina.
Yeah.
You expressed a lot of skepticism about the offshore industry.
Yeah.
The question I'd like to ask, do you think the new institute Mara. I mean, climate change should have been an enabler for many things, and it was. Ireland did a great, Eddie O'Connor was mentioned earlier, I mean, a great start to all of that. But the momentum's been lost, totally. Now, the opportunity of the offshore it seems to be a very big opportunity, and it's institutionally instrumented by this Mara Institute, which is chaired by Mark Mallet. Do you think that will make a difference to what might happen in the coming years?
You across that, Martina, Mara. Great. So if you want to take that and then Lisa's queries as well while you have the mic, that'd be great.
You know, I agree that there is great potential in the offshore wind, and I think Mara is they're setting up and is really useful in terms of getting all the different actions together. My scepticism is that Mara aren't in charge of planning permissions. And that's where the delivery will fall down. So that's where my sort of scepticism on getting the projects through.
Because they have done the spatial maps, they're identifying the areas, they're doing
They're
kind.
They're doing a lot of the technical work, they're doing a lot of the licensing, but they're not in charge of the planning. And to link back to the earlier question, Hermit Lacey's there, a lot of the issues we have, I think, with planning is what we call in economics insider-outsider theory. The people whose houses are under the power lines, the people whose sea view is going to be obstructed by the turbines. They're the people who shout very loudly. Whereas the people who gain from the investment in infrastructure and energy and the water supply, there are many, many diverse people. So you don't get the same shoutiness.
And then
beneficiaries.
Lisa's question. So, are we dependent on just like 2 or 3 companies, a very narrow base of companies that could inflict a lot of damage?
We are. Now, the Revenue Commissioners publish a top 10 percentage. So 10 companies pay 57% of the corporation tax. The Fiscal Council did a deeper dive into individual companies, and they found, I think, the top 3 companies pay, I can't remember the number.
35%.
So we have 35% of our corporation tax coming from 3 companies. So that's a potential very, very large loss in government revenues on the basis of.
Okay, Seamus, will you just follow up briefly on that, and then what is the top rate of tariff that you think we could absorb?
Yeah, so I think on that, the question was, what's the top rate of tariff that the Irish business could absorb? We have to remember, this is the US imposing tariffs on itself. It's the US is paying them. When it comes from an Irish perspective, yes, the US is an important market, and if you're selling Irish whiskey or Irish butter into the US, you want them to be priced competitively against US products, but we have other markets. Yes, we spend a lot of time developing the US market, but we can diversify. The big impact will be on the US companies. So the huge scale of exports is US companies selling products back into the US, so it's not necessarily Irish business that will be absorbing it. And some of the numbers that have been suggested are simply too large for those operations to continue as they are. So even the 30% on top of the pharmaceuticals, if it was to be placed in pharmaceuticals, would be too large for those businesses. But they are US businesses, and it would be US companies in a US US IRS.
But is that strictly true? I was in Phoenix a couple of weeks ago. I was staying in a pub down there, and I was chatting to some sailors on a boat parked up in the harbour, and they were loading cranes made in Port Arlington onto a ship, and that ship had to be in American waters by the 17th of August or it was going to get hit with tariffs. So, it's individual companies could get really hammered. Isn't that the way it is? So Kerrygold, Seamus,
Specific Irish companies, if they had that tariff imposed, it would put them at a competitive disadvantage against US products. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But Kerrygold have gone through tariffs before, the tariff issue arose during the first presidency, yes, on a very much narrow basis. But Kerrygold came through a period of having tariffs imposed on them there. But again, the issue is if we take the example of Ireland, as mentioned earlier, when Ireland had tariffs on importation of cars, and we had Ford manufacturing cars in Cork, what did those tariffs mean for Ireland? Well, I meant, one, the choice was much more limited. If you're going to buy a car in Ireland, it was either Ford or a much higher priced import that paid the tariffs, and 2, prices in the main were higher. If Ford didn't have the competition, their prices were higher. So who suffered as a consequence of the tariff policy that Ireland introduced? Well, it was consumers of cars. We had beneficiaries. There were 6,000 jobs below in Cork, and they are very visible. And you say you're going to reduce the trade barriers that make those jobs viable. Well, they're a very vocal and sort of loud group and we perhaps see something similar happen in the US, who is going to suffer primarily as a result of the US tariffs? It's US consumers. It's going to make their prices higher. They may be beneficiaries in terms of employment, but the world has moved on to that. So what's the top rate that Ireland could in a sense, absorb? Not very high. But remember, it's the US imposing tariffs on itself.
Yeah. Danny, and maybe a lot of these companies will try and absorb the tariffs, and but not pass it on to their customers. What's the vibe you're getting?
So, while the tariffs might be blanket on a whole country,
yeah,
the consequences are quite idiosyncratic depending on the nature of the businesses. So, for instance, as Seamus kind of alluded to, I was going to say it's churlish to talk about butter.
Yeah.
On the Kerrygold, having experienced before, a product like Kerrygold, which is very much a luxury brand bought by rich people, a huge tariff could be sustained because the company can pass it on, the prices go on, the sensitivity is not there. It may not impact some businesses, but their taste may change. They may not buy it because it is Irish butter, not because it's quality.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know what the dynamics of these is. But the ESRI have given us a chance to put context in this. So 25% tariff on goods and on services. The estimate, but it gives you a sense of proportion, is that we will be damaged by 3% in our output below a baseline. That's not predicting a 3% inflation. It just says that if we were growing to 5%, we might be down to 2% or whatever. And also on the labour market. So it's significant to 100,000 jobs.
Wow.
But there's 2.8 million of us in the economy.
Okay.
So it's not existential tariffs, because what happens with tariffs is short term, if you can't move or can't do things, they will be hitting you. You move around, you find new markets, you make deals with India, with Russia maybe in time. That the United States has started. I got accused of calling President Trump a gorilla.
Oh, and did you?
I didn't, actually.
Oh,
what I said
should you have?
What I said was...
Would you like to take this opportunity now?
I put it on the record. IBEC boss says
yes.
the president dances with gorillas.
Oh.
The analogy I was doing was that dancing with a gorilla is that you might want to stop the dance.
Oh.
But the gorilla might. And my point was not to call Donald Trump the gorilla in this one, but you started a dance with the world. And you may think you can stop it, but you don't have the cards, to use his words.
Yeah.
And in that context, I think that the tariffs issue is short term, yes, of course, and everybody's trying to genuflect. But to finish at this point, is that at the moment, it is Europe that is chickening out. And why is that so? It's because it doesn't have the defence.
Right.
Countries that actually aren't chickening out, China, Canada to a certain extent, have actually the military aspect. So that must be the lesson that we get from what's happening.
So you support the increase in military spending in Europe, that maybe US has done the EU a favour forcing them to actually get their act together?
Absolutely.
Right.
It's tragic nonetheless.
Yeah.
And here's the point to make. Europe is going to leave future generations with way more debt than we would like. But the reason this generation of Europeans are doing it is that future generations of Europeans would have the Europe that we had the benefit of. And that's why we're going to do this. And Ireland should be part of this as well. It is cowardice, it is hypocritical to try and think that we can be absolved from this. We have, as I said at the start, the risks are already here.
Okay. Vince and Porrick, it's 22 minutes past. Will I take one or two more questions, or would you like me to wrap? Okay, so there were two people down here at the end who have... Oh, you've got the mic. He who has the mic gets to ask a question.
I have the force.
Well done.
Liam Mulligan.
Hi, Liam.
Yeah, big topic. I've worked in energy and transportation and industrial construction myself. But I have one comment on Dermot. Last week in a news feed, I got building project goes ahead despite objections.
Oh, wonderful.
What building project doesn't have objections?
Yes, yeah.
All the huge barriers have been mentioned here. But the willingness to actually take first steps is another one. We have a national hydrogen plan. But as Jerry Duggan and others have pointed out, we need storage. And absolutely nothing has been done to work out if any of the actual storage options will work. There has to be geological storage. And apparently Northern Ireland has enough in the Carrickfergus salt fields for itself, but we have nothing. So hydrogen is dead, even if it actually comes down to a reasonable price. On the other hand, what the big question is to take the first steps. Are the things like the metro? The metro was proposed by Garrett Fitzgerald before the Lewis was built. And after the Lewis was built, we were offered this rump metro that did not deliver what Garrett's proposal was. And the metro link now, as proposed, is still the same project.
Yes.
In a different country.
Yeah.
And excluded from the strategic railway.
So have you a question?
How can we get us to make decisions to move forward on the things we need, even on the very basic planning of them?
Decision making. So I'll take one down here. Oh, hi, how are you? And then, and be brief, and then I'll make my panel be brief. Yeah.
Seeing as we have an engineer on the panel, if in an idle moment during lunchtime he could map out what 33 square metres looks like.
Why?
For the planning, the apartments.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
So the missing factor in reaching this decision was we have never had a hackathon that involved people who want to buy properties, developers and planning officials. And I don't think they'd end up with a 33 square metre as being the solution.
Okay, so dropping standards is a problem. So Sean, on making those big decisions, power storage, all of that, what's your take on that?
I wouldn't be quite as pessimistic about the hydrogen piece. There is a hydrogen strategy under preparation. We have missed a trick in not mobilising the empty Kinsale gas field as a potential storage place. It's been decommissioned now. Re-entering it would be quite difficult, but it could be done. The Cork gas field will run out relatively soon. That could be looked at. Northern Ireland, unfortunately, without getting too geological, the storage in the salt caverns is not looking as promising as it was because there's other pesky geological pieces coming into play there.
Sean,
if you have a half an hour.
A quick one, since you mentioned the gas fields running out. LNG. There's still a lot of reluctance to press ahead with LNG. I think we're the only country in Europe, so we have one gas pipeline. If that's cut off, we're in big trouble. Are we missing a trick there?
Well, we have a Northern Ireland gas pipeline as well.
Okay, right.
We are missing a trick. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Academy. I'm a bit sceptical about the LNG proposal that's in front of us. It'll give us storage for about 6 days. That's hardly energy security.
Well, I don't know. It could be the difference between surviving and not surviving. But anyway, I hear your point.
There is an alternative.
Yes.
And that is to look for indigenous gas resources in the vicinity of the Cork gas field.
And do you think they're there?
It's probable.
Okay.
But it is politically very challenging because we've turned our face against that.
Okay, I'm going to wrap and I'm going to ask everyone, are they optimistic or pessimistic? Danny?
Very optimistic.
Oh, great, well done. Seamus?
Yeah, I'd be optimistic. Can I just follow up on the
housing
one briefly?
Yes.
In Ireland we have a housing stock of 2 million units. 1.8 million, or 90% of them, are houses. We have lots of houses. What we don't have are units for 1 and 2 people. And if a 1 and 2 person unit is 33 square metres, that is it. We need lots of those. What would that then do for our housing stock? We have lots of single people, individual people living in houses, sharing with 3 or 4 unrelated people. If we had more single-person units, they could go and live in single-person units and have their life there, and then more of the housing would be freed up for more houses and families. So I think our issues on housing are to say we can't have 33 square metre single-person units. It's bonkers. We need more of those, not less.
Okay.
Selfish.
Right. Thanks, Seamus. Martina, optimistic or pessimistic?
Optimistic.
Great.
More cautiously.
And Sean, optimistic or pessimistic?
Vladimir Ilyich Lenin once said, every day a victory, even a small victory.
Yes?
I'm optimistic.
Oh, great. All optimistic. Thanks to the panel, Martina, Seamus, Danny and Sean. Thank you very, very much. So it's lunchtime. I'll be back at 8 o'clock tonight with Sam McBride on the case for and against a border poll, and we're going to be doing polls of you in the audience. We're going to have a lot of fun with that, so I'll see you at 8 o'clock tonight. Thank you. Right.